On May 1st, 1999, the Victorian Railways freight company known as Freight Australia came into the world, starting service throughout Victoria and interstate. Freight Australia was formed because the V-Line stopped doing freight operations. However, just 7 months after Freight Australia was formed, came Freight Australia's first accident. On November 26, 1999, a Freight Australia grain train number 9784 was making its way to Ararat Yard. The train consisted totally of ex-V-Line equipment, everything from engines to wagons. The engine consisted of G-Class locomotive G517 and 21 VHGF grain hoppers. The first 11 were empty and the remaining 10 were fully loaded. Meanwhile, another train numbered 9795, which was a ballast train, consisted of G-Class locomotive G518. It was hauling 14 ballast hopper wagons and was sat stationary at the number 2 road at Ararat Yard. On the afternoon of the accident, the train examiner who had collected the train staff from Ararat the previous evening drove the crew of 9795 to Elmhurst to relieve another crew. After delivering the crew to Elmhurst, it had been arranged that the train examiner would drive to Ararat later that evening in order to collect the Maryborough Ararat train staff for the same reason that he had collected it the night before. The same instructions were issued for the collection of the train staff as they had been issued the day before. The train examiner departed from Maryborough for Ararat, a car journey of approximately an hour and 10 minutes. Shortly after receiving a telephone call from the driver of 9795 advising of the train's anticipated arrival at the Ararat Yard. At about the time the train examiner arrived at Ararat, he observed the train travelling west on the main line. That train was later confirmed to be 9783, which passed through Ararat at 8:39. In addition, a policewoman who was in the area at approximately 8:45 briefly spoke to the train examiner as he waited at the Adelaide end of the siding. At approximately 9:10, the driver of 9795 advised Melbourne Train Control that he had stopped his train in order to pick up a small female child that had been observed walking beside the track, as he was concerned that the child might fall under the moving train. The second person alighted the locomotive cab, but before he could reach the child, she fell into a nearby dam. The second person acted quickly to rescue her. Police and ambulance attended the scene shortly after their rescue. As a result of that accident, the arrival of 9795 into Ararat Yard was delayed by approximately 30 minutes. At approximately 9:25, the driver of 9795 advised Melbourne Control that he had stopped his train at the Ararat stop board but was unable to contact Adelaide Train Control in order to obtain a section authority to the Prioness Loop. Melbourne Control then contacted Adelaide Control to coordinate the clearance. Adelaide Control advised that there were no trains shunting in the Ararat Yard and that 9784 was ready to depart east from Prioness Loop, a location approximately 3 kilometres to the west of Ararat. Adelaide Control further advised that 9795 was to enter the Ararat Yard cautiously as 9784 would be running through Ararat. This information included authorisation to enter the Ararat Yard was issued immediately by Melbourne Control to the driver of 9795. The driver proceeded to move the train into the number 2 road in the Ararat Yard, then seek to obtain a section authority to proceed west onto the main line after 9784 had passed through Ararat. A section authority had not been obtained by the time 9795 became stationary at the Adelaide end of Ararat Yard, about 1 locomotive length before the derailleur block. Shortly after his train came to a halt, the driver reported that he observed the derailleur block come off the line and saw someone near the points. Simultaneously, he observed the lights of the train travelling east around the curve on the main line. The second person was still in the cab at the time, but was preparing to alight in anticipation of changing the points once section authority had been obtained. The crew members of 9784 reported that they had obtained a section authority to travel east from the Pryness Loop to Maroona and had also received a proceed indication from the signals at the Melbourne end of Pryness Loop. The proceed indication meant that there were no trains occupying the section of line for which the authority had been issued, and that the train could proceed at the maximum speed. 9784 was accelerating to the maximum posted speed of 75 km an hour, and was travelling approximately 74 km an hour when it reached the curve in the main line, shortly before Ararat. The driver reported that he had observed the headlights of 9795 on the siding at Ararat, but was not able to see the position of the points in the headlight of his train until shortly before the collision. When he realised that the points were not set for the main line and that a collision was imminent, the driver immediately selected emergency brake and moved quickly behind the driver's seat to brace for the impact. The second person did likewise behind his seat. The collision occurred only 2 seconds after the emergency brake was applied. Marks on the number 2 road were constant in heavy braking at the time of the initial impact. In order to escape the impending collision, the driver of 9795 jumped from the locomotive cab, shouted towards the person at the points, and ran up the embankment. The second person of 9795 also left the cab and ran up the embankment, and then... The two trains collide at approximately 9:35 at night. G517 slams into G518. Both engines suffered damage to their cabs. Thankfully, due to the anti-ride bars on the locomotives, it meant that either locomotive could not ride over each other, but the remaining ends that were coupled up to the wagons suffered the most damage. The first 12 grain wagons, 11 empty and 1 loaded, of 9784 were projected over the top of its locomotive and came to rest in various positions. Some wagons blocked the main line, while others mounted the embankment on the northern side of the number 2 road. Few of those wagons remained upright and most sustained extensive impact damage. The locomotive of 9784 was extensively damaged by the impact of the wagons passing over it, and by the bogies, wheels, undergear, and grain being deposited in the exposed engine room. In addition, the fuel tank on the locomotive ruptured and its contents spilled. The 13th wagon came to a stand in a slightly elevated position and lay against the trailing cab of locomotive 9784. The trailing bogie remained on the rails, but both of the leading bogie and wagon body were supported off the rails by the accumulated debris. The 14th to the 21st wagon remained upright and on the rails. As for train 9795, the leading Balshopper wagon absorbed most of the impact of the locomotive of 9795, being propelled along the number 2 road, and caused extensive damage to the trailing cab of the locomotive. The locomotive of 9795 also suffered extensive impact damage from the grain wagons passing over it. The second Balshopper wagon sustained damage to the underframe and draw gear at the leading end. The remaining 12 wagons on the ballast train were not damaged and were pulled clear during the morning following the accident. The crew of 9795 were not injured during the accident, but did not require hospitalisation. However, they were severely shaken by the event. The train examiner who had operated the point suffered from effects of shock and was admitted to Ararat Hospital for observation. Both crew members of 9784 were seriously injured. The driver suffered head injuries and multiple lacerations and was admitted to Ararat Hospital for treatment. The second person suffered serious chest injuries and shoulder injuries and was airlifted to the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. The mountings on the seat behind which the second person had braced himself for the collision broke during the impact sequence. The seat mountings on the driver's seat remained intact. But why? Why did this have to happen? Was it something to do with the engines? Was it something to do with human error? What was it? The ATSB did an investigation to find out what had happened, and they discovered that this accident was caused by human error. First off, the training examiner had no direct method of communicating with the crew of 9795, with other company personnel, nor with the train control. Also, the training examiner was neither qualified nor authorised to operate the points at ARA. Because of this, the training examiner later indicated that he operated the points because he was trying to be helpful. Because he was not qualified, he had no authorization to operate the points, and considering that he had no training, he should not even operate the points on his own. After the accident, both engines were scrapped, as well as a few hoppers that were damaged. G517 and G518 are the only two G-Class diesels that have been scrapped. It has been 21 years since this accident, and now the question remains, will we ever see another accident due to human error?